This full moon comes with a warning for humanity, a heads up, so to speak. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Pisces full moon. We will spotlight and interpret the rare Grand Cross involving Pluto and Mars, with benevolent influences from Mercury, Arcturus, and the asteroid Chiron. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There is a lot going on, so let's jump in. Well, hello there. Thank you for tuning in. Hello, David. How is your day going?
Going really well. Sun is shining, and yeah, happy as.
Happy as Larry and the bees are buzzing. As we as we said in the intro, a rare Grand Cross. And I love that we are able to take our time today to really dive into this upcoming full moon and Pluto and Mars all making a beautiful square. So what is the overall points you want to talk about today?
Yeah, you've just mentioned the Grand Cross. It's a visualize a square, and at each corner lies a planetary body. So we have, if that square shape, which we'll show on the screen, is tipped on its side, and one planetary body sits at each corner, that is a grand square. So we have the Sun, the Moon, Pluto, and Mars all in play. Pluto is what we call a transpersonal planet, which means that it is comes with a message for humanity, a collective message from the cosmos, and in a Grand Cross, sometimes these show up in a personal chart as well. But basically, what it means is that all four energies are competing with one another, and therefore they're sending mixed messages into the field. And that field can be visualized as the inside of that square. Mars, in this case, expresses anger, assertion, dominance, war, and conflict. Pluto signals the transformation and dissolution of three pillars of reality, which we will cover a little later, what's called the cognitive map. The Sun represents confident self-expression in the middle of rapid change, and the Moon represents or symbolizes emotional intelligence, discernment, and access to our soul memories.
All competing energies. I don't know whether I want to just be in a bunker underground for the next week or embrace it fully. You finished off that last little bit with the moon. So full moon in Pisces. I mean, for me, the moon is very closely related to Pisces. I know that Pisces is not ruled, or the guardian is not the moon, but anytime we have a reading and when someone has their moon in Pisces, it's really that close connection with all that is, not necessarily all that we can see. So full moon at this time, how do you interpret it?
Yeah, I think you put it really well. It's part of the trilogy, the water trilogy. Of course, Cancer is part of that as well. So we have Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are all part of that water energy. And because Pisces is the third of those energies in that trilogy, it is the most intense experience of the water energies. And it, as you say, it involves not just the emotions, but the psychic and the unseen realms as well. So anytime there is a full moon in Pisces, this is the energy of what we call dissolution and emergence, which means effectively that one door is opening and another is closing, if you like. This phase, it can be seen as a phase transition to another state of being. Think about the alchemy of how ice, when heated, turns to water, and water, when heated, turns to steam, and steam becomes part of the air. This is what we mean about the phase transitions and the interaction of the energies. Pisces represents all of that happening. So the alchemy of consciousness, you could call this. The full moon in Pisces is about the opening and awareness of the evolutionary ladder that's present, giving us a window of opportunity to peer into the future. There's a heightened spiritual awareness available for those who are tuning in at this time. There's an activation of psychic capabilities, lucid dreaming, and deep connection with the unseen sentient realms and the power of the spirit animals. This is an opportunity to tap into our higher self, our guardians, our guides, and angelic beings. And it's an opportunity also to practice transcendence. And we can do that through the activation of that transcendent state. There's so many modalities that can get us there, but I've just, off the top of my head, think of a few music modalities. So arpeggio tones, for example, Tibetan bowls, chimes, or something like light refraction, playing with crystals and playing with the light. You have this beautiful spinning crystal that we have sometimes when we just locate it and it moves around, and the rainbow frequencies and the light are pretty transcendent. You can just get mesmerized by that. So this is what we're talking about, to take advantage of the energies, the positive energies of a Pisces moon. For some, this is a time of deep meditation and mindfulness practice, pranic breathing, Kundalini yoga, tapping, emotional freedom techniques, a meridian work, shamanism, even. Expect a shift in consciousness if you are open to it, where the truth, the irrefutable truth, is discovered through personal experience rather than through the lens of our beliefs and our mental constructs, through the lenses of our fears and anxieties, which actually distort and help us to be distracted. They distract us from the truth. And the truth we're talking about here is the connection with the divine universal intelligence, the source of all that is. That's what's on the table with a Pisces full moon.
And it might be such a strange concept for those who have forgotten, right? Have forgotten that we are a spirit being having a human experience, and that this short or long life, however you want to look at it, that is literally just that in the existence of our soul. But that's what you and I believe anyway. And it doesn't take away that the suffering that we endure in this human life, for me, the suffering is part of the growth. And whilst you're in it, it's difficult. I had a moment earlier in the week, but by having conversations, by connecting with, and whether you do that with the music or the crystals, or sitting on outside in the grass and really observing. Here in New Zealand, we have spring all around us, from the grapes, vine growing, to the calendula flowers being just pure beauty in my eyes, and just observing that. And it's like, wow, there is so much abundance around us, even though you might not be able to buy the things you want to buy. There are other things that are more important. So during a full moon, just to remember it for us all, the moon is on one side with the sun on the other side. So that's the first vertical of this grand cross. And then we have Pluto on one side and then Mars on the other. So that's another straight line. And each of those are making a square. So that's what's making that square on the screen, which we will show. So please tell us how these competing energies compete with one another now.
Yeah, look, the Grand Cross is rare. That's the first thing I'm going to say straight off the bat. We don't normally see these. So I take it as a pretty serious message from the universal intelligence, from source, from the cosmic realm, and a heads up, as we mentioned at the beginning. This is a warning to be aware that there are some events which are not predicted by the Grand Cross, but they are foretold that there is disruption. There's a lot of disruption in the field. And let us look at each component briefly and just give our interpretation of that. Yeah, overall, we believe that this event, this Grand Cross event, a celestial event, has been orchestrated by Source for our benefit. Many will not be aware of it. They will be focusing simply on the sun and moon and the opposition with the full moon, and that's great. But we like to go a little deeper with our readings. These grand crosses, because there's four energies, they contain a lot of intelligence, a lot of insight for us, both individually and collectively. There are multiple cross currents to navigate. If you can imagine swimming, sometimes you get in the sea or even in rivers, you'll get cross currents. Well, there's more than a couple going on here, and they are energetic cross currents. They are frequency and vibrational cross currents. So that's important to grasp when we're talking about this. Um, and it also, with all of those cross currents, as we mentioned, with the competition between Mars and Pluto, the sun and the moon, it's really important to connect with source at this time, or whatever your um, interpretation is of the universal intelligence, the higher mind, the higher self, the wisdom the of life that is not contained necessarily in us, but it's outside of us, and we can tap into that right now. It's very important that we do that, however we do that, however we achieve that, because the risk of becoming overwhelmed is real. So let's look at Mars. Mars, in this case, in this context, is the warrior planet. And I think looking around in humanity, we won't talk about that here in any depth, but you'd have to be hiding under a rock to realize, or not realize, that there's a lot of war energy on the planet right now. And certainly Mars is part of that, is a symbol of that. His position in this Grand Cross certainly amplifies that, especially given the relationship with Pluto, which we'll touch on in a moment. But this is an extremely forceful energy coming through from Mars, and it's the energy that seeks to dominate, to conquer, and to crush. There's a lack of tolerance here. There's a lot of impatience in the field as well, and a desire to act out extreme fantasies of command and control. And this can manifest both individually and collectively, or both. And we can see this in our own families, in our communities, and even at the nation state level. Mars is about, in this context, assertive action. From an individual perspective, it's being assertive and executing on our plans and our projects for our highest good. So if you've been sitting on something and waiting for the right time, Mars is giving us a push. The color red and the ram are symbolic of Mars, and it wouldn't surprise if you see a lot of that sort of energy floating around in the field at this time. Pluto is the archetype of sweeping change, what I call paradigm shifts. And paradigm shifts involve a fundamental reconfiguration of underlying assumptions. So what's an example of a paradigm shift? When steam engines were first created, they were run on water and coal, and they gave way through innovation and technology to combustion engines that are run on petrol and diesel. That's a paradigm shift, a huge change in the underlying assumption, in this case of transportation. So steam engines become combustion engines. And of course, we now know that a lot of these engines are giving way to hybrids and electric vehicles. So there's another paradigm shift. That's what we mean by paradigm shift. So these can be technological shifts, psychological shifts, social shifts. The collapse of the Berlin Wall, for example, was a paradigm shift in the governance structures. Another example of a paradigm shift is the record player, or the records becoming a compact disc and then compact disc becoming an MP3. What's interesting actually is a paradigm shift almost going backwards, back to the future with that particular paradigm, where people are actually rediscovering the joys of records. But be that as it may, the point here is that a paradigm shift takes something from vinyl to compact discs to the MP3. So I think you get the idea. So these paradigms, these assumptions and beliefs are all tied up in this archetype of Pluto. And what we call, this is our interpretation of Pluto to help it make sense. We call this the Plutonic pathway. And how do these paradigms, how do these deeply held assumptions and beliefs, be they individual or collective, how do they actually change? What is the process? Well, we think that the process comes down to three pieces. Firstly, there's a transmutation of frequencies or energies, and that transmutation begins through the process of awareness. So something can't change until we become aware of it, and that process of awareness is what we call a transmutation. Generally, where a paradigm is shifting or changing, i.e. the Pluto pathway or the Pluto archetype is activated, what we're talking about is the movement, as I said at the very beginning, the movement from one phase to another. But for that to happen and for us to be involved with that, we need to be aware. And that's what we call the transmutation of negative frequencies or energies. The second part of that paradigm shift process, or the Plutonic pathway, is transcendence. And in this case, it's the transcendence of beliefs. And that happens through reframing of those beliefs. If we go back to the example of the steam engines going to combustion engines and then to electric vehicles, the belief underlying all of that was that the way to drive around or to transport goods on trains or by ships or even air, there was a set of beliefs there. And for them to have been shifted, there needs to be a transcendence of those beliefs. And that happens through reframing, through thinking through those assumptions and those beliefs, what I call playing with the Rubik's Cube, that idea of there's different ways of looking at things. And then finally, paradigms change, which is the reflection of that Pluto energy. This is what's on the table right now, through transformation. So through awareness, we can transmute energies or beliefs. We can transcend those beliefs by reframing them, rewriting the story, if you like. And then we can transform situations and scenarios with the knowledge and action that came from those first two steps. So there's a very practical example of how we move through the Pluto energies in a positive way rather than being swept up in them. But I mentioned at the beginning that there's a very interesting astrological alignment happening here. And the warning for humanity is this. And we've talked about this before, but for those who are listening and hearing for the first time, we believe, and as is can be shown in the charts using 13 sign astrology, which we think is the divine design, the correct alignment of the planets as they are, not as they are laid into a 12 sign chart, which isn't actually reflecting where the planets physically are in the constellations. So if you look at where Pluto is right now, you will see that she is sitting at 33 degrees Sagittarius. She is right on the cusp of Capricorn. In other words, about to go into Capricorn. And that signals a momentous shift in consciousness. Pluto's cycle is about 250 years. So if we go back around about 250 years, we find that the last time that Pluto was at this exact location was the year 1776. So the warning for humanity is that this 250-year cycle that began in 1776, and I'll outline briefly the three key pillars of reality that are all up for renewal, reconfiguration, transmutation, transcendence, and transformation, i.e., Pluto's energies, are going to assert themselves beginning very shortly. But if we go back in history as a teacher, we'll find that in 1776, when Pluto was at this exact point in the chart, that there were three major events that took place, and there is no coincidence in this, that are played out and are still playing out today. The first was the Declaration of Independence, and those in the United States and those followers of the US, many consider that signing of the Declaration in that whole year of 1776 to be the birth date of the United States as we know it today. And the United States is the key part of the cognitive map which we all operate under, because one, it is the global hegemon, which means that she is the nation which holds the reserve currency, and she is the most dominant economic power on the planet right now, and military power as well. And so much of the world is based on American ideals and American consciousness. But the signing in 1776 of that, arguably the birth date of the nation itself, the state of the US, was in 1776 when Pluto was at this exact point. So that's the first pillar that needs to be reviewed, transmuted, transcended, and transformed, because 250 years is a long time for an empire to be in existence. The second thing that happened in 1776 was the publishing by Adam Smith of a book called The Wealth of Nations. And that book is the underpinning philosophy, i.e. the assumptions and beliefs, or the paradigm, if you like, which we started with, that underpins all modern economic theory, all trade theory, and all capital markets. So those who are unaware, as Adam Smith proposed the idea of what he called the invisible hand of the market. And we know that the invisible hand of the market isn't working. We are experiencing this as the world, humanity, the greatest wealth divide ever in the history of humanity. And many blame capitalism and the wealth of nations and the pursuit of trade and what they call comparative advantage, and the allowing the invisible hand of the market to sort itself out. That has been blamed for the wealth divide and the huge disparities between nations on this planet, where we have some of the richest nations and some of the poorest. And that paradigm needs to change. But that also is based on a book published by Adam Smith, released in 1776. Fascinating. America, birth of America, and the release of the Wealth of Nations. And the third pillar that happened in 1776 was that Adam Weishaupt, a historical figure, formed and created the Bavarian Illuminati Party, which later became known as the Order. And the Order is the power behind the economic system and the power behind the American hegemon. So we have three pillars of reality that are up for transformation, represented by the archetype of Pluto, who is at the exact same location as she was 250 years ago right now. If that isn't a warning and message for humanity, I'm not sure what is. Lastly, the last two pieces of that grand cross are the sun. And in this context, we're talking about finding your mojo, expressing your personality, going after your goals, having confidence and resilience in the face of adversity, and functioning with high degrees of personal power. And finally, the moon, the fourth part of that grand cross, This is about emotional intelligence, developing and tapping into emotional intelligence. And what is that? Emotional intelligence is firstly self-awareness. So having an understanding of our impact on others. You talk often, Sana, about the ripple effect. We've been talking about that. So the way we talk, the way we speak has an impact on others. But being emotionally aware of that is part of emotional intelligence. And many are not aware of that. Social awareness is part of emotional intelligence as well. How do we interact with others? How do we deal with them? How do we negotiate? How do we resolve conflicts? That is part of emotional intelligence. Another part of it is self-management. Sometimes we have to put a lid on our emotions. We have to compartmentalize them. We have to suppress them at, because often it's inappropriate. And later we've got to circle back to them and let them out and talk about them and release them. But we can't always be full on emotional. And that is part of that self-management and emotional intelligence, and picking and choosing when we express ourselves emotionally, as opposed to going into our intellectual and rational brain. But it's also about being responsible for our choices. And that also comes back to emotional intelligence. It's we make a choice, we got to accept the consequences for it. And the last part of emotional intelligence, which is all active at this Grand Cross, is relationship management. And I touched a little bit on about that before. But this is about how do we as leaders, how do we as influencers catalyze and inspire others? And we don't have to have the title of leader or manager or boss or CEO. We can be just the biggest influence in the household, in our communities, in our churches, in our sports teams. How do we inspire others? And how do we bond and collaborate? All really important aspects of emotional intelligence. So we have the four things in play with the cross, with the Grand Cross. We have Pluto transformation and these deep paradigm shifts, and we've talked about those three pillars of reality. We've got Mars, the warring, agitating, aggressive energy. We've got the sun, which is about finding our mojo in the middle of all of that. And the moon is being emotionally intelligent and aware of what's going on so that we don't lose our heads.
Oof. I do enjoy these beautiful geometric shapes, and when we get to talk about it in reading, it's really exciting for those watching and listening right now. If you wonder if you might have a Grand Cross in your natal chart, flick us a message, and we would love to explore that for you for a small donation. So the sun, it is still sitting in Virgo. For those unaware, Virgo is the largest constellation. The sun takes 45 days to get through that. So there might be people thinking, oh, but it's Libra time now. It's not Libra until the end of October, early November. So just keep that in mind. And close to the sun right now is Arcturus, a fixed star that sits at 30 degrees Virgo. And Mercury is also playing around in that same area. Close to the moon on the other side in Pisces, we have Chiron. So how are these planetary bodies assisting or agitating the sun and the moon right now?
Yeah, they all play a role at the Grand Cross, but if the main actors, if you like, are the sun and the moon, Mars and Pluto, then the supporting actors who have a very important um, role to play as well are these three planetary bodies. And let's go through them just quickly individually. Chiron, the asteroid Chiron, is the archetype of separation anxiety. So there's a little story that goes to Chiron, and it is that when all of us, all humans, when we come down the birth canal and the umbilicus is cut, what gets locked into our bodies is a traumatic separation anxiety experience. That is that as an infant child emerging into the world through the birth canal, through the mother, that our source of sustenance through the 9 months of gestation, the source of sustenance is suddenly cut. And the metaphor here with the Chiron archetype is that that cutting of the umbilicus becomes locked into our bodies as an experience of separation anxiety or separation from source. The source in this case is the source of the mother who provided us with sustenance and life force through the pregnancy period. So this is metaphor, and this is an illustration of what the Chiron archetype means. When we look at that and peel it back a little bit, this cut off from source, the mother and the umbilicus, is a deep fear of abandonment that manifests at an individual level, at a soul level, and in fact was illustrated in full noise when Christ was at the cross, strung up, and he cried out, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" So we're talking about an existential trauma that exists at the level, the taproot, the level of consciousness, at the level of the soul, the individual soul. And it manifests in our minds as questions of existential questions, such as, where did I come from? How did I get here? Now, this, of course, presupposes that, like we mentioned before, we are open to the idea of the evolutionary ladder, which has been activated by Pisces, by the moon in Pisces. And that, of course, tapping into that evolutionary ladder, and you mentioned before, spirit having a human experience, that is activated, opened up to us, made available to us when we meditate and when we're involved with mindfulness practice, whatever that happens to be. There is no prescription for that. For some, it requires many hours of stilling their minds through the traditional methods of meditation. But for others, they can quite quickly access that mindfulness state, that stillness within. And when we get to that, we find in that inner journey of exploration that there is this cluster of trauma that's linked to this deep-seated feeling of being separated from source, and it's manifesting everywhere. Many people turn to religion, turn to leaders, turn to influences to save them from themselves because they think they've been abandoned. We mentioned before that the opportunity of Pisces moon is to reconnect with source, to reconnect with our guides, our guardians, the angelic realms, it's the sentient beings that are out there beyond any concept of this immediate environment. Out there, there is a lot of help for us. But when Christ said, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" what he was talking about, or what he was activating, really was this Chiron consciousness, this separation anxiety. Now, the trick to reconnect with source, as I've mentioned, is through contemplation, introversion. But this Chiron energy manifests as the victim savior paradigm. We've talked about the paradigms, which is a set of assumptions. It's a script which is running in humanity, deep in the veins of humanity. And it's where we look to others to lead us to the promised land. We look to others to relieve our anxieties of separation. We turn to specialists, to experts, to influencers, and we suspend our critical minds. So just think about if you are at that prone to follow others because they've got all of the answers. And there's nothing wrong with tapping into other people's knowledge. Of course, that's how consciousness expands to an extent. But the greatest expansion of consciousness is firstly realizing that we are not separate from source, that we're just simply experiencing an illusion. And that's how we overcome the Chiron trauma. So that's actually a positive when we can get to that. Now, Arcturus enhances this process of growth and expansion of consciousness. Arcturus is the star with its physical location, and you and I love looking at Arcturus because it's so bright. It is when the sky is dark, and we're not talking about the morning star or the evening star, which is often the planet Mercury or the planet Venus. But when the sky is dark, often the brightest star is Arcturus. Now, Arcturus as an archetype represents the guardian. He is the guardian of what they call the seven sisters that sit in the constellation of the Big Dipper. When you look at an astrological chart, sorry, a chart of the sky, not an astrological chart, which is a computer generated, but if you look at an actual map of the sky, you will see that Arcturus sits at the bottom of these seven sisters called the Big Dipper. And in the mythology and in the archetypes, what Arcturus is, the role he is playing in that situation is that of a guardian, the guardian of the seven sisters, which is also known as the seven sages, the seven wise men, the seven philosophers, or the seven rishis. These are the knowledge keepers, the sages who protect the energy and wisdom needed to guide humanity through periods of transition. Pisces, we mentioned about dissolution and emergence, one door opening, another closing, and transformation, Pluto. So the presence of Arcturus here is highly benevolent and signals to us that the wisdom of the ages is available to those who are seeking it. It's not just handed out. We have to show that we are interested. Another version of the seven um, sisters or the seven sages is the seven virtues. And I'll mention what they are here. And they are wisdom, equity, temperance, fortitude, faith, forbearance, and benevolence. And if we are looking to develop and cultivate those virtues in our lives, we are playing into the Arcturus archetype, who, of course, is the keeper of knowledge and the keeper of wisdom that is so desperately needed at this time. And the final part of that is Mercury. And we've mentioned Mercury many times in our readings before, but Mercury is the archetype of communication, lessons, and learning. We call Mercury the archetype of content. And by content, we mean that in our formative years, we were a sponge, and we were exposed to influences, or what we call centers of influence, who taught us wittingly, consciously, unconsciously, good and bad habits. They gave us knowledge, they gave us information. This wasn't just formal teaching. This could have been from our siblings, from our family, from the television, from these days social media. Wherever that information comes from, that's what we call the content, and that's what underpins communication. So Mercury here is the archetype of communication, lessons, and learning. And what we've been asked to do is to examine our deepest beliefs and ask ourselves, how were they constructed in the first place? What are the roots and the foundation of our assumptions, our beliefs, our worldview, which of course form our paradigms? The process of transmutation that we mentioned earlier as part of the Plutonic path starts with self-examination, the introspection, and looking back to childhood experiences and understanding that there was a circle of influence that we were exposed to in our formative years. And some of that information is old, distorted, worn out. Some of it's awesome, and we need to leverage that. But it's having that discernment at this particular point in time is the message of Mercury.
And of course, Virgo is governed, ruled by Mercury. So there's, yeah, beautiful energies all around. And spoiler for those listening, this full moon is happening the day after my birthday. So she is a potent time for me. My sun is conjunct Arcturus, so I always enjoy listening to the stories about Arcturus because I do feel very much connected with that star. A lot of information shared today. Thank you, David. How will you summarize that for us?
And just saying happy birthday in advance now, and now that's a matter of record on this blog. So you also, because it's the 17th in the tarot for the lovers of tarot is I believe the Temperance card, which is one of the seven virtues or the seven sisters, the wisdom contained in the ages of Arcturus that Arcturus is guarding for us. But the summary is this, that there's a grand cross being formed, and that's a message, a warning for humanity. The three pillars or paradigms are collapsing that began 1776, 250 years ago, signified by the position of Pluto in the cusp of Capricorn. Those pillars or the cognitive map is the US hegemon, the economic system, and the order. The power behind both the hegemon and the economic system, by the way. The Plutonic pathway is the process of transmutation, transcendence, and transformation. We are right now in the middle of crossfires of confusion. There is a war over consciousness, Mars. The confusion and the crossfires is the energy of Pisces. There is a cacophony of noise out there. There's a lot of mis and disinformation in the field. There's a lot of competing interests everywhere. To cut through all of this, we need to engage in meditation and mindfulness practice. We need to connect with our guides, our guardians, and most importantly, source consciousness. We need to be discerning, Mercury, and realize that we are not alone, Chiron, that we have not been abandoned, that we can tap into the seven virtues, the seven sisters, the wisdom, the rishis, represented by Arcturus, but we have to call in that energy to our lives. It's available to us, but only to those who are genuinely seeking. The evolutionary ladder, the choice is yours to make right now. And I've finished with this. Where attention goes, energy flows.
Yeah, and what came to me as you were reading or saying the summary is things are not happening to you, they are happening for you. And so by embracing the turmoil that you might experience in your life now, maybe in a year's time, you can look back at that moment and go, because that happened, I can now see the benefits or what it has made me a better person as such. Just to go back to the tarot, because it was bugging me, you are at the Temperance with your birthday on the 14th. The 17, yes, the 17 is the
The
star.
star.
There you go.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Nice little correction there.
Well, we
Both
don't,
beautiful cards,
they
by the
are,
way.
they are, well, all
Yeah, they're
tarot,
both in play. Both in
indeed,
play, aren't they? The star
in Arcturus
and
and,
temperance.
mm, yes.
Beautiful.
So thank you so much for listening to us today. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Forward it to as many people. We want to connect with you all. A chart can be made for you or a natal reading, and I look forward to read your comments. Any other things you'd like to say, David?
No, none other than namaste.
Namahi. Until next time.
Bye bye.